The last rays of evening sun filtered through the tall windows of Silver Springs Conservatory, throwing golden light across rows of polished wine glasses. The air hummed with chatter and the faint music of a string quartet tucked into the corner. Lena Monroe adjusted the strap of her flowing midnight blue dress, trying to steady her nerves. She wasn't here just for the wine-tasting fundraiser, it was her first time stepping into a public event in Silver Springs since fully embracing herself. Tonight was meant to be a fresh start, a chance to mingle, to breathe as the woman she had worked so hard to become. The dress shimmered softly when she moved, the satin catching the light. She held her glass of rose delicately, inhaling its floral scent, willing her heartbeat to calm. For weeks, she had anticipated this night with cautious excitement. New city, new people, a new chapter. But then, she heard it. A laugh. Familiar. Sharp as a blade cutting through the velvet hum of the crowd. Lena's stomach tightened. She turned, scanning faces until her gaze locked on a figure she knew instantly. Mark Sullivan. Her oldest friend, once inseparable, now a ghost from a life she thought she'd buried. He looked different, broader in the shoulders, a hint of gray in his hair. But the easy charm in his expression was the same. And then, as if fate were mocking her, his eyes lifted. They landed directly on hers. For a fleeting second, confusion flickered across his face. A furrowed brow, a tilt of his head. And then recognition slammed into him. Eli, he mouthed, barely audible. The sound of her old name, one she had shed years ago, hit Lena like ice water. She nearly dropped her glass. Instinct screamed at her to flee, to disappear into the crowd before the past unraveled everything she had built. But her heels felt rooted to the floor. She lifted her chin instead. "It's Lena now," she said when he reached her, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly against the cool stem of her glass. Mark blinked, struggling to match the woman before him with the boy he had once shot hoops with after school, the one who'd shared secrets during long summer nights. You look different," he stammered, then immediately winced. "I mean, you look good. You look happy." Lena allowed the corner of her mouth to curve into a faint smile. "I am." The words hung between them, thick with years of silence, unanswered questions, and unspoken truths. The string quartet's melody swelled, filling the pause neither of them could break. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. "Can we talk? Maybe step outside?" Lena hesitated. Every instinct warned her of danger, old wounds, old betrayals, and the possibility of rejection. But another part of her, the one that had learned to face storms instead of hiding, nodded. "All right," she said softly. Together, they slipped past glittering gowns and tailored suits, out into the crisp evening air where the lights of Silver Springs reflected off the river. Mark shoved his hands into his pockets, his voice unsure. "So, Lena, you've changed. A lot. And I don't mean just appearance. I mean everything. You carry yourself different. Stronger." Lena's gaze drifted toward the water, her reflection wavering in the ripples. "I had to become who I always was. It wasn't easy. But it was right." Mark studied her in silence. Then, almost reluctantly, "Why didn't you ever tell me? Back then?" She turned to face him fully, her eyes sharp with years of unspoken truth. "Because even I didn't know how to explain it. And I was afraid, Mark. Afraid of losing the people I thought would stand by me." The weight of her words settled between them, heavier than the night air. Mark looked away, guilt flickering across his features. "Maybe I failed you," he whispered. Lena didn't answer. Not yet. For now, she let the silence speak. But deep inside, she knew this reunion was only the beginning. And with it came the risk of reopening doors she wasn't sure she wanted unlocked. The cool night air wrapped around Lena and Mark as they lingered by the riverbank. The distant chatter of the wine-tasting event faded behind them, replaced by the steady hush of water against stone. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his hands still shoved deep into his pockets. He looked like a man wrestling with ghosts. You should know, he began slowly, I never meant to lose touch. Life just happened. College, work, family. And then one day, years had gone by. Lena tilted her head, watching him carefully. It wasn't just life, Mark. You pulled away. Back then, you knew something was different about me. You teased me about it, remember? Mark flinched, the memory hitting him harder than expected. He remembered the jokes, careless, cutting, the kind boys thought were harmless. But now, under Lena's unwavering gaze, they burned with shame. I was young. Stupid, he admitted, his voice low. I thought I was being funny. I didn't realize I was hurting you. Lena folded her arms, her midnight blue dress catching the glow of the streetlights. You did. More than you'll ever know. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken history. Lena almost turned to walk away, to seal the past for good. But something in Mark's expression stopped her, raw regret, maybe even the hint of an apology that had taken years to surface. Finally, he asked the question that had been clawing at him since she said her name. Lena, when did you know? Truly know? Her breath caught. It wasn't the question itself, it was the way he asked, not with judgment but with genuine curiosity. I think, she said carefully, I always knew on some level. As a kid, I hated the box everyone tried to keep me in. I pretended, because that's what was expected. But it never fit. It wasn't until I left Silver Springs, started therapy, and gave myself permission to listen to my heart, that I finally understood. I wasn't becoming someone new. I was finally becoming me. Mark's eyes softened, though his jaw tightened with unspoken emotion. And you seem happy. At peace. I am, Lena said firmly. For the first time, I'm living instead of hiding. He nodded, his throat bobbing. Then, hesitantly. Would you let me make it up to you? Even just a little? Maybe dinner? Coffee? I don't want this to be the last time I see you. Lena's pulse quickened. This was dangerous territory, reconnecting with the one person who once made her feel invisible, but who also knew pieces of her past that no one else did. Why now, Mark? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Why care after all this time? He looked at her, guilt shadowing his face. Because seeing you tonight reminded me of everything I lost when I let you go. And maybe I don't want to make the same mistake twice. Her heart stuttered. The old Eli, the boy Mark had known, would have crumbled at those words. But Lena Monroe was stronger. Wiser. And she wasn't about to let the past sweep her away so easily. Still, she found herself whispering, maybe coffee. Once. That's all I can promise. Mark's lips tugged into the smallest of smiles. I'll take it. As the night wore on and they parted ways, Lena felt a storm brewing inside her. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a test. A chance to confront the past, but also a risk of letting it undo her hard-won peace. And as she walked home beneath the city's glowing street lamps, she couldn't shake the question echoing in her mind. Was this reconnection a path toward healing, or the start of a brand new wound? Saturday afternoon arrived with an unexpected crispness in the air. Lena stood in front of the small cafe on Brookside Avenue, smoothing the sleeves of her cream cardigan. She had almost canceled twice. Her logical mind warned her that reopening old doors could lead to nothing but pain. But curiosity, and maybe a sliver of hope, had won out. The bell above the cafe door jingled as she stepped inside. The scent of roasted beans and cinnamon buns wrapped around her, warm and disarming. At a corner table by the window, Mark was already waiting. He rose as she approached, awkward but earnest. Lena, he said, her name sitting carefully on his tongue as though he were testing its weight. You came. I said I would, she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. One coffee. That was the deal. He gave a small nod, not offended, just understanding. A waiter dropped off 2 mugs, steam curling upward. Still black with a splash of sugar? Mark asked. Lena blinked. You remembered. Some things stick, he said with a faint smile, though his eyes carried a sadness that undercut it. They sipped in silence for a moment. Outside, children ran past with paper kites, their laughter spilling into the cafe. Lena traced the rim of her mug, trying to summon the right words. Mark broke the quiet first. I need to say this. I'm sorry. For back then. For the names, the jokes, the times I should have stood up for you and didn't. You deserved better. His voice cracked slightly, rawer than she expected. For a long beat, Lena stared at him, weighing his apology. You hurt me, she said finally. In ways I didn't even understand until years later. But I can tell you mean that. So, thank you. Relief flickered across his face. Then, cautiously, do you hate me? She thought about it, swirling the coffee in her cup. No. I don't hate you. But I don't trust you. Not yet. Mark accepted the words with a slow nod. Fair enough. The conversation shifted, gradually at first, updates about careers, anecdotes about family, stories of mutual friends. But then, Mark leaned forward, his tone quiet but intense. Lena, were you happy, before? I mean, back when we were still close? Her chest tightened. The question sliced deeper than he knew. I wasn't miserable, she admitted, but I wasn't whole either. Every smile, every joke, it was a mask. A performance. I was afraid that if I let anyone see the truth, they'd walk away. Mark's hand twitched as if he wanted to reach for hers, but he stopped himself. And now? She met his gaze, her voice steady. Now, I don't need anyone's permission. I finally feel alive. Something unspoken lingered in his expression, a mixture of admiration, longing, and maybe even regret. But before Lena could unravel it, his phone buzzed sharply on the table. He glanced at the screen, and his features hardened. Quickly, he flipped the phone face down. Everything okay? Lena asked. Yeah, he said too quickly. Work stuff. Nothing important. But Lena wasn't convinced. The flicker of tension in his eyes betrayed more than he wanted her to know. She leaned back, her instincts prickling. For all his apologies, Mark still carried secrets. And as much as part of her wanted to believe in this fragile reconnection, another part whispered that danger often hides behind familiar faces. The cafe's golden afternoon light shifted as clouds rolled in, shadows spilling across Lena and Mark's table. The comfortable warmth from earlier had cooled into something brittle, an unease neither could quite name aloud. Lena's eyes lingered on Mark's phone, still face down like a buried secret. She took a slow sip of her coffee, studying him. His shoulders were tense, jaw clenched tight. You've changed too, she said finally, breaking the silence. But something tells me you're carrying a weight. Mark exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. Lena, it's complicated. Life usually is, she countered softly. But you don't have to hide it from me. Not anymore. For a moment, he looked like he might open up. His mouth parted, eyes flickering with the same vulnerability she remembered from nights they'd sat on rooftops as kids, talking about dreams they were too scared to chase. But just as quickly, he closed himself off, shaking his head. Not today, he muttered. That stung. Not because she wanted his confession, but because she knew he still didn't trust her enough. She forced a small smile. All right. Then let's talk about something else. They shifted to safer topics, travel, books, films. Lena found herself laughing despite the tension, reminded of the friend she had once loved like family. Yet the longer they spoke, the more she noticed subtle fractures in his mask, the way he avoided questions about his job, how his eyes darted whenever she mentioned Silver Springs gossip, the unfinished sentences that dangled like broken threads. By the time they stepped outside, dusk had painted the sky in violet and rose. They stood on the sidewalk, the hum of traffic surrounding them. Thanks for meeting me, Mark said, his voice gentle. It meant more than you know. Lena hesitated, hugging her cardigan closer. You're welcome. But, Mark. He turned, waiting. You should know, I can see through you. Whatever you're hiding, it's written all over your face. If you really want to make things right between us, you'll have to start by being honest. Adam's apple bobbed. For a second, it looked like he might speak, but instead he forced a tight smile. One step at a time, Lena. Please. She studied him, then nodded. One step. They parted ways, but Lena's unease followed her home like a shadow. She tried to shake it off by pouring herself into her sketchpad, doodling logo ideas for a new client. Yet her pencil stilled halfway through. She saw Mark's face in her mind again, the guilt, the flicker of fear. Then her phone buzzed. A new message. Not from Mark. From an unknown number. Be careful who you trust. Mark Sullivan isn't who he says he is. Lena's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled as she read the words again, the letters blurring. Was it some cruel joke? A mistake? Or had she just walked straight back into the orbit of someone who could shatter her life all over again?